Tonight we journey to the spine of the world, to the high Andes, where the air is thin enough to make your head spin and the nights so cold they feel like they could crack stone. Picture yourself not as a visitor, but as a member of a Quechua-speaking community, over 5 centuries ago. The sun is a distant, weak coin in a vast, impossibly blue sky. You're standing on a mountain slope so steep that if you stumbled, you'd roll for 1,000 feet. And at your feet, buried in the unyielding earth, is the ragged, humble, misshapen root that is the sole reason your world exists. The potato. This isn't the smooth, uniform russet you'd grab from a supermarket bin. This is a gnarly thing, skin patterned like a topographic map, flesh ranging from sunshine yellow to the deep purple of a bruise. Your survival, the survival of your family, your village, and the entire sprawling, glittering empire you've heard tales of from traveling traders, the Inca Empire, hangs by the thread of this frostbitten tuber. You probably won't survive this landscape, this altitude, this sheer audacity of trying to build a civilization here, without it. The empire's gold is a decoration. Its true wealth is stored in these bitter, underground lumps. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. We're about to go deep, and I mean deep, into the frozen earth and the even more fascinating frozen time techniques of a people who outsmarted scarcity itself. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The paradox is staggering. The Inca Empire, or Tawantinsuyu, was the largest empire in the pre-Columbian Americas. At its zenith, it commanded a realm stretching over 2,500 miles, from modern-day Colombia down to central Chile. It had paved highways through clouds, monumental architecture of stone fitted so tightly a razor blade can't slip between the joints, and a bureaucratic system that could track every llama and blanket in its dominion. This was an apex civilization, a monument to human organization. And its fundamental fuel, the caloric bedrock that allowed laborers to move those stones and soldiers to march those roads, was a crop notoriously vulnerable. A single hard frost could wipe out a year's planting. A blight could turn a field to black slime in a week. Building an empire on the potato is like building a skyscraper on a foundation of jelly. It's an act of sheer, stubborn genius. Your relationship with this plant is intimate, born of 1,000 generations of observation. You know each of the dozens, maybe hundreds, of varieties that grow in your family's scattered plots by touch, taste, and the shape of their leaves. You have the Piepa micuna, the everyday eaters, starchy and reliable. You have the Piepa wake-you, the boilers, which hold their shape. And you have the bitter ones, the Piepa cayuzi, packed with glycoalkaloids so potent that eating them fresh would tie your stomach in knots and make you see strange lights at the edge of your vision. Those ones, the frost-resistant, rock-hard bitter potatoes, are your key to the future. They are your ticket to defying time. The mainstream historical fact we must start with is this: the domestication of the potato in the Andes, beginning over 8,000 years ago, is one of humanity's greatest agricultural achievements. From a handful of toxic wild species, Andean farmers patiently bred the incredible diversity that would one day circle the globe. Many of those original, ancient varieties are virtually inedible without the precise, transformative alchemy of processing. You didn't just dig them up and eat them. You had to negotiate with them. You had to trick them, freeze them, dry them, and tread on them to make them yield their nourishment. It was a culinary plot to outwit plant poisons. And this leads us to the first open scholarly debate that hums beneath this entire story. Historians still argue whether the potato was the engine that allowed the Inca Empire to rise, or merely the lucky fuel it found already perfected by the countless, older civilizations it absorbed. Were the Inca brilliant innovators of storage and distribution, or were they simply the best bureaucrats, the most efficient organizers of an ancient technology they inherited? As you pat the cold earth over your bitter potato harvest, you're probably not thinking about imperial politics. You're thinking about the coming freeze, the ritual stomp, and the gnawing hope that this year, the tuna will be good, and the kolka will be full. You don't fight the mountain, you convince it. This is the first and most fundamental lesson, whispered by every grandfather showing a child how to place a seed. The Andes are not a passive landscape upon which you build your fields. They are a volatile, living entity of tectonic grumbles, vertical geography, and microclimates that can change from balmy to brutal within the span of a single hillside. To simply plant on a slope is to watch your topsoil, your seeds, and your hopes wash down into the valley with the first serious rain. So, you become an earth weaver. You become a builder of giant, green staircases for the gods. This is the genesis of the iconic Andean terrace, or Andean. The work is communal, backbreaking, and profoundly clever. You start by selecting a slope. With footplows called chaquitaclas, essentially a long wooden pole with a curved footrest and a bronze or stone tip, you and your ailu, your community, begin to cut into the mountainside. You're not just digging, you're performing surgery. The first cut is the deepest, creating a foundational retaining wall of stone, fitted together without mortar, its weight and angle calculated through millennia of trial and error to withstand the earth's pressure behind it. This wall can be waist-high for a gentle slope, or a towering, multi-story edifice for a steeper face. It is the bone structure of your new land. Behind this wall, you create the belly of the terrace. You don't just dump dirt. You build a drainage sandwich. First, a layer of large stones for water to flow through. Then, a layer of smaller gravel. Then, a layer of sand. Finally, you bring in the precious topsoil, often carried up from lower valleys in baskets on your back or on llama trains. This layered profile is the secret. When the torrential rains come, the water doesn't pool and rot the potato roots. Instead, it percolates down through the soil, sand, and gravel, draining efficiently out through gaps in the stone wall, preventing erosion and landslides. You've not only created flat land, you've created the perfect, well-drained bed for your temperamental tubers. But the genius goes deeper than just preventing mudslides. These terraces are climate control devices. A south-facing terrace in the high Puna might capture just enough extra sunlight to extend the growing season by a critical week. A north-facing terrace in a lower, warmer valley might be shaded just enough to protect a frost-sensitive variety. By building these staircases up and down the mountains, you've created a vertical archipelago of microfarms, each with its own tiny, controlled environment. On a single mountain face, you can grow dozens of potato varieties, each in its ideal niche. The bitter, frost-resistant Papa Amaga thrives up high, near the realm of condas. The sweeter, softer varieties flourish lower down. You've tamed the mountain's chaos into a mosaic of order, a patchwork quilt of food security. The mainstream historical fact here is the sheer scale. At sites like Murray, often called the Inca Agricultural Laboratory, you find enormous, concentric circular terraces sinking deep into the earth, creating temperature differentials of up to 15 degrees Celsius 27 degrees Fahrenheit from top to bottom. It's widely believed these were used to study and adapt crops to different climatic conditions, an ancient, open-air biosphere project. Some researchers play with. There's a theory that the specific layouts and orientations of certain terraces, especially these circular ones, were also designed to create unique acoustic environments. The idea is that the stone walls and bowl shapes might have amplified certain frequencies, perhaps the human voice during rituals or the sound of wind, integrating soundscape with landscape in a way we're only beginning to sense. Imagine planting seeds to the echo of a chant, bouncing off stones warmed by the sun. This terrace system wasn't just productive, it was the prerequisite for everything that followed. You can't talk about storing potatoes for years if you can't reliably grow a massive, diverse surplus in the first place. The terraces provided that surplus. They turned scarcity into abundance, but an abundance with a ticking clock. All these potatoes, especially the vital bitter ones, would rot in a matter of weeks if left as they were. The mountain had been convinced to bear fruit. Now, you had to convince time itself to stand still. And for that, you would need to enlist the most powerful force on the Altiplano, the cold, star-filled void of an Andean night. The harvest of the bitter potatoes is not a celebration of plenty, but a solemn race against decay. You've gathered the knobbed, rugged tubers, the ones that laugh at frost, into piles that look more like river stones than food. They are inedible now, their flesh laced with alkaloids nature designed to deter every hungry creature, including you. To eat one raw is to invite a world of gastrointestinal distress and hallucinogenic confusion. These potatoes are not food yet. They are a puzzle, a biochemical lockbox, and the key is the very environment that seems so hostile, the thin, freezing air of the Altiplano night. This is where you make chuno. The process is less a recipe and more a seasonal ritual, a physical dialogue with the elements. As the dry season settles in, usually around June or July in the southern hemisphere, you spread the bitter potatoes in a single layer on the hard, flat ground of a specially prepared area called a chunachin. This isn't just any patch of date. It's often a bed of ichu grass or a smooth, stone-laid surface that will absorb the day's weak solar heat and radiate the night's intense cold directly into the tubers. You don't just dump them, you arrange them with space to breathe, like tiles on a frozen courtyard. Then, you wait for nightfall. And here, on the high plain, night is not an absence of light. It is an active, penetrating force. The temperature doesn't just drop, it plummets. It can fall to -10, -15, even -20 degrees Celsius, 5 to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, under the crystal clear, star-obsessed sky. You retreat to your stone house, bundled in llama-wool blankets, and the freeze does its work. The water inside each potato cell expands, rupturing the cell walls. The potato becomes a spongy, frozen block. At first light, before the sun can even think about warming the world, you are out again. Under a sky turning from indigo to rose, you walk onto the chunachin in your sandals or bare feet, and you begin to tread. This is the heartbeat of the process. You don't gently massage. You stomp. You shuffle dance across the frozen potatoes in a slow, methodical crush. The goal is to expel the now thawing, bitter liquid from within the shattered cells. It's cold, exhausting work. The sound is a wet, rhythmic squelch in the morning silence. As you trample, the potatoes flatten and weep their toxic juice into the thirsty earth. Then, you leave them. For the next 3 to 5 days, the cycle repeats. Freeze by night, stomp by day, freeze by night, stomp by day. Each cycle desiccates the potato further, driving out moisture and concentrating the remaining starches. The potato transforms from a frozen blob to a wrinkled, leathery, and rock-hard black lump. By the end, what you have is no longer recognizable as a potato. Chuno Negro is lightweight, durable, and utterly inert. It is a potato reduced to its essence, shelf-stable calories. You can toss it in a sack, store it in a cool, dry place, and forget about it for years, even decades. To reconstitute it, you'll later soak it in water for hours, after which it can be boiled, stewed, or ground into a flour. It becomes the base for chiro, a hearty soup that is the sole food of the high Andes. You have, through rhythmic freezing and pressing, performed a kind of culinary alchemy, turning poison into preservation, creating edible stone. The mainstream historical fact is that this freeze-drying process is one of the oldest known food preservation methods in the world, predating the Inca by thousands of years. It's a natural technology that harnesses the extreme diurnal temperature swing of the high-altitude desert. The specific microbial ecology that develops on Chuno during this process is unique. Some researchers playfully suggest that the communities of microbes that colonize the drying potato, a mix of endemic bacteria and fungi from the soil and air, might contribute not just to preservation, but to a faint, complex umami flavor prized by traditional cooks. It's not just dehydration, it's a slow, cold fermentation. And this leads to a quiet scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the discovery of Chuno was a brilliant, intentional innovation or a happy accident born of necessity. Perhaps someone left potatoes out in a frost, found them frozen and squashed underfoot, and discovered they were edible once dried. Given the profound sophistication of the rest of Andean agricultural science, the intentionalists seem to have the edge. But the truth is likely a marriage of both. An initial accident observed with incredible acuity, then refined over generations into a precise, community-sustaining ritual. As your feet grow numb from the morning stomp, you're not thinking about theory. You're thinking about the satisfying crunch underfoot, the smell of cold earth and potato starch, and the deep, secure knowledge that winter's hunger has just been pushed years into the future. But the story of frozen potatoes isn't a monologue, it's a duet. While the creation of Chuno Negro is the deep, oathy bass note, a rugged, communal stomp under an open sky, there exists a more delicate, almost ethereal counterpart. This is the path to Maria, or Tunta, often called the White Chuno. If Chuno is the workhorse preserved by the mountain's raw cold, Maria is the refined aristocrat, purified by water's embrace. Its creation is a subtler, more finicky alchemy, and it begins with a choice. You select a different set of potatoes, often the less bitter varieties or specific cultivars known to yield a whiter product. As with Chuno, you spread them on the ground to freeze during the crystalline nights. The initial freeze is the same, the cellular rupture identical. But after that first dawn stomping, you introduce the transformative element. Instead of leaving the crushed, weeping potatoes to refreeze on the bare earth, you gather them up. You carry them in baskets or hide-lined sacks to the icy, knee-numbing waters of a nearby mountain stream or a prepared, spring-fed soaking pit. Here, you perform the baptism. You submerge the frozen, trampled potatoes in the flowing, frigid water. They are not simply rinsed, they are soaked for days, sometimes up to a month. The water, often barely above freezing itself, acts as a leaching agent. It gently pulls out the remaining bitter glycoalkaloids and the oxidized compounds that turn Chuno black. You tend this aquatic garden daily, agitating the potatoes to ensure even leaching. It's a quieter, more patient task than the vigorous stomp, a vigil by the streamside, the sound of water a constant companion. After their long soak, the potatoes are drained and laid out once more on clean, dry ground, often on beds of ichu grass or cloth to avoid soil contamination. They are left to dry under the intense, high-altitude sun and the continuing cycle of cold nights. Without the soil contact and with the bitter compounds washed away, they do not darken. They desiccate into hard, white or pale gray nuggets, often with a smoother, more uniform texture than their black cousins. Maria is the ghost of a potato, a pale, durable shell of pure starch. It is considered a premium product, often rehydrating to a fluffier, more neutral-tasting consistency than Chuno, and historically, it might have been more common in the stores of the Inca nobility or for special occasions. The mainstream historical fact is that this leaching process in water is a sophisticated form of food detoxification, effectively removing solanine and chakanine, the potato's natural toxins. It's a chemical refinement achieved with nothing but time, water, and cold. The traditional knowledge holds that the best Mariah is made with water from specific, sacred springs or glacier, believed to impart a superior quality or even spiritual purity to the final product. It wasn't just a chemical process, it was a hydrological ritual, connecting the food to particular, revered places in the landscape. And this variation sparks a practical debate. Historians still argue about the relative economic and social roles of Chuno versus Mariah. Was Mariah primarily a luxury good for the elite, or was its production a widespread, regional specialization based on local access to clean, flowing water? The evidence is patchy. Some colonial accounts note Mariah in royal storerooms, while ethnographic studies show its production in many peasant communities. The likely answer is both: a hierarchy of preservation where the basic, rugged Chuno was the staple of the masses and the army, while the more labor-intensive, resource-dependent Mariah represented a finer grade of stored wealth, used for state hospitality, ceremonial feasts, or as a high-value trade item. You, by the stream, watching the pale tubers bob in the current, are participating in a technology that created not just sustenance, but a spectrum of quality, a calorie-based class system etched in white and black. With your harvest transformed into lightweight, durable Chuno and Mariah, you now face the final, critical puzzle: where to put it all. You can't just pile these precious, decades worth of calories in the corner of your stone house. Moisture, rodents, thieves, and the simple chaos of daily life are constant threats. The solution isn't a shed or a cellar as you might imagine it. The solution is a living, breathing part of the mountain itself. You look up the slope, above the highest terrace, to where the wind sings a constant, thin song through the Ichu grass. There, dotting the ridges and passes like silent sentinels or stone beehives, are the kolkas. You approach one. From a distance, it might be mistaken for a natural rock outcrop. But as you get closer, you see the intelligence in its placement and form. A kolka is a storage structure, but to call it a warehouse is to miss the point entirely. It is a climate regulation device hewn from the landscape. Most commonly, they are circular or rectangular stone towers, built with the same impeccable, mortarless masonry as the finest Inca temples. But their magic isn't just in how they are built, but where and why. You build your kolka high. Elevation is your first ally. The higher you go, the colder, drier, and windier it gets. Perfect conditions for keeping your freeze-dried potatoes in a state of suspended animation. You choose a site exposed to the prevailing winds, often on a slope or promontory. The shape is functional genius. The walls are thick, providing immense thermal mass. Small ventilation ducts or carefully designed gaps between stones are built in near the base and the apex. This isn't an accident, it's physics in stone. Here's how it works. The cold, dry night air, being denser, sinks and enters through the lower vents. It flows through the interior, absorbing any residual moisture from the stored goods. As this air warms slightly from the stored food and the minimal geothermal heat of the earth, it becomes less dense and rises, exiting through the upper vents, carrying moisture away with it. The wind sweeping across the top of the structure creates a slight suction, actively pulling air through the system. It's a passive, continuous convection current, a natural refrigerator and dehumidifier running on nothing but altitude and air pressure. Inside, the temperature remains cool and stable, fluctuating far less than the violent swings outside. Your Chuno rests in perfect, dark, dry stillness, protected from pests by its elevation and hard shell. The mainstream historical fact is the sheer scale of this infrastructure. The Inca state built vast networks of these kolkas at strategic points, most famously near the administrative center of Huánuco Pampa, where over 500 structures could hold an estimated 40,000 cubic meters of food, enough to feed tens of thousands for years. Some kolkas, particularly in certain regions, appear to have been designed with specific acoustic properties. Their shape and placement might have amplified specific sound frequencies, perhaps the whistle of the wind, or a guard's call. There's a theory that this wasn't just for communication, but part of a sensory system. The changing sound of the wind through the vents could tell a knowledgeable keeper about shifts in air pressure or humidity inside the chamber, a stone-built biofeedback machine. Imagine a guardian listening to the kolka hum, diagnosing its health by ear. This leads us to a foundational debate in Andean archaeology. Historians still argue whether the iconic circular kolkas were used primarily for potatoes and other tubers, while the rectangular ones were for maize, quinoa, and other grains. The separation makes logical sense. Different shapes for different ventilation needs for different types of stored goods. But the archaeological record is messy. Residues are found in both. The truth is likely that while a general principle existed, local adaptation was key. The kolka was a flexible technological template, its final form a negotiation between state design, local materials, and the specific needs of what a community had managed to save from the mountain. Your kolka, standing silent on the ridge, isn't just a storehouse. It's a stone lung, breathing with the mountain, keeping your future alive in its cool, dark belly. Now, step back from your single, village kolka and see the system. Imagine a map of Tawantinsuyu, the Inca Empire, not with political borders, but with a web of dotted lines connecting mountains, valleys, and administrative centers. At the nodes of this web, you don't see palaces first, you see clusters of those stone storage towers. This network of kolkas wasn't just about food security. It was the secret weapon of imperial power, the beating heart of a redistribution economy that turned agricultural surplus into political control. Your village's surplus, stored in the local kolka, was part of this vast, state-managed calculus. The principle was called MITA, a rotational labor tax. You didn't pay your dues to the Sapa Inca, the divine emperor, in gold or coin. You paid in time and labor. For part of each year, you worked on state projects, building terraces, roads, temples, or tending state-owned llama herds. In return, the state provided for you during that labor. But more importantly, it provided a safety net. In a bad year, when the frost bit too deep or the rain never came, the doors of the state kolkas would open. The surplus gathered from good years across the empire would be redistributed to your ilu to prevent famine. This created a powerful, tangible bond. Loyalty to the state was directly linked to survival. The state's legitimacy was stored in those potatoes, maize, and jerky. This system turned food into a tool of geopolitical strategy. When the Inca expanded, conquering new territories, they didn't just send in the army. They sent in agricultural engineers and logisticians. One of the first acts in a new province was often the construction of state farms, Micmac lands worked by transplanted loyalists, and, crucially, the building of kolkas. These were stocked with food brought from the imperial heartland or produced locally. This served multiple, devastatingly clever purposes. First, it supplied the occupying Inca army without pillaging the local populace, which could foster resentment. Second, it created a local reserve that could be used to reward collaborators or feed the population in times of hardship, winning hearts and minds. Third, it projected an image of inexhaustible, divine abundance. The state's power was visible not just in soldiers, but in full storehouses, an unshakable promise of order. The mainstream historical fact is that this system was so effective it allowed the Inca to maintain large, permanent armies and a sedentary bureaucratic class without collapsing under the weight of its own logistics. It was, in essence, a command economy where the state controlled the primary means of production and distribution. Some chronicles and folk traditions hint that not all kolkas were created equal. There are whispers of decoy kolkas, structures that looked identical from the outside but were less perfectly built or placed, containing lower-grade surplus or even being partially empty. The real treasure, the finest mariah and choice grains, might be in a less obvious cluster, a bit further up a hidden canyon. It was a form of security through obfuscation, a stone shell game played across the empire's ridges. This brings us to a pivotal scholarly debate about the nature of Inca power. Historians still argue whether this storage redistribution system was primarily a benevolent, socialist-style safety net that ensured universal well-being, an idea popularized as Inca socialism, or whether it was first and foremost a tool of elite control, a method of creating dependency and stifling local autonomy. The truth, as it often is with empires, lies in an uncomfortable middle. The system did prevent famines and provide stability, which was a profound good for the average farmer. But it also centralized ultimate power in the hands of the Sapa Inca and his priests, who could grant or withhold life itself by opening or closing the kolka doors. Your loyalty wasn't just expected, it was engineered into the landscape, stored next to the potatoes. The empire's greatest monument wasn't Machu Picchu. It was the silent, sprawling network of well-stocked stone towers that made rebellion not just treasonous, but suicidally stupid. To understand the depth of this system, you must first understand that a potato was never just a potato. In your hands, as you brush the cold soil from a tuber shaped like a coiled serpent or one with eyes as deep as a llama's, you are not holding a mere carbohydrate. You are holding a relative, a character in a story, a piece of the living earth. The potato, or papa, is kin. This relationship is the spiritual and cultural bedrock that made the technological marvels of terrace, chuno, and kolka not just logical, but sacred. The earth itself is Pachamama, a living, sentient deity. Planting is not an act of agriculture, it is an act of reciprocity. You offer libations of chicha, fermented corn beer. You bury offerings of coca leaves and fat. You speak prayers into the soil. In return, Pachamama allows her children, the tubers, to swell and nourish you. Each variety has its own kamak, its life force, its essential spirit. The bizarre, multilobed potato isn't a genetic oddity. It's a potato that embodies the playful or chaotic aspect of the Earth's energy. To cultivate such diversity is to honor the full spectrum of Pachamama's creativity. You don't just grow what is efficient, you grow what is meaningful. This worldview infuses every step of preservation. The act of making chuno is framed within this reciprocity. The freezing nights are the breath of other mountain deities, the apis. The stomping is a rhythmic offering, a physical collaboration with these forces to transform the inedible into the enduring. When you submerge potatoes to make mariah, you are entrusting them to the water spirits. The kolka is not a dead storehouse. It is a womb, a place where the dormant spirit of the food rests safely until it is needed to re-enter the cycle of life through consumption. To mistreat stored food is to insult the spirit within it and the deities who provided it. These potatoes are woven into the very fabric of your social and ceremonial life. During the harvest festival, Papa Tapui, you offer the finest and most unusual tubers back to the earth and to the mountain shrines, Huacas. Potatoes are central to marriage negotiations, given as gifts to solidify bonds between families. In rituals for health or fortune, a shaman might use specific colored potatoes as conduits to diagnose illness or predict the future, reading the patterns in their skins like a botanical oracle. The potato is a unit of social currency, a spiritual actor, and a direct link to the divine. The mainstream historical fact is that this animistic, reciprocal relationship with the natural world is a cornerstone of Andean cosmology, persisting for millennia and continuing in many communities today. Among the thousands of potato varieties, there are those traditionally designated not for eating at all, but purely for ritual use. These might be particularly vivid in color, a deep black or a brilliant magenta, or have an especially potent bitterness. They are grown in small, special plots and used exclusively as offerings. Some are even said to be potatoes that watch, used in protective rituals for the home or field. Their value isn't caloric, it's metaphysical. This deep cultural integration leads to a subtle but important debate among anthropologists. Historians still argue about the degree to which the Inca state co-opted these ancient, local spiritual relationships for political ends. Did the state promote a standardized, imperial version of Pachamama worship to unify diverse conquered peoples around a central agricultural deity, using the potato as a common symbol? Or did the local, intimate Ilu-based practices remain largely distinct and autonomous, with the state simply adding a layer of official ritual on top? The evidence is in the ruins and the rituals. State-sponsored temples have agricultural motifs, but the small household shrines found in villages tell more personal stories. The potato, in its glorious, mundane diversity, was the object of both a grand, imperial theology and a million quiet, household prayers. As you place a perfectly formed, twin-lobed potato into the offering bowl, you're participating in a conversation with the oath that predates empires and will outlast them. Now, let's see this stored energy in motion. The empire's power didn't just sit in silent kolkas, it moved, and it moved fast. Picture a rugged footpath, part of the 25,000-mile network of Inca roads that stitch the mountains together like sinew. You're not a farmer now. You are a chasqui, a relay runner, the human fiber-optic cable of the empire. Your job is to carry quipus, knotted string records, verbal messages, or small, vital packages from one tambo, way station, to the next, at a sprint, in a system so efficient it could get a fresh fish from the coast to the Inca in Cusco in under 48 hours. And the fuel that powers this biological internet? It's in the small, hide bag slung across your chest, chuno and charqui, llama jerky. Your run is a brutal test of endurance. The air is thin, the trails are steep and often treacherous. You cover your assigned leg, usually between 6 to 12 miles, though some elite runners did more. At a dead run, your lungs burning, your heart pounding against your ribs. At the next tambo, another runner, already waiting and primed, takes the message from your hand and continues the sprint without breaking stride. You collapse, gasping, into the care of the station attendants. Your body is a broken, depleted machine. This is where the logic of stored food becomes immediate, personal, and life-saving. You don't get a hot meal that takes an hour to prepare. You get efficiency. You are handed a handful of rock-hard chuno and a strip of tough charqui. You might soak the chuno briefly in a little water or chicha if there's time, but often, you simply gnaw on it. Rehydrated, it would be soup. Dry, it is a dense, starchy brick. You wash it down with water. Within minutes, the easily digested carbohydrates and proteins begin flooding your system, repairing muscle, restocking glycogen. The chuno is lightweight, non-perishable, and packs a massive caloric punch for its weight and volume. It is the perfect expeditionary ration. This system of runners, powered by preserved food, meant information could traverse the empire faster than anywhere else in the pre-Columbian world, and arguably faster than any contemporary system in the 15th century. A message could travel over 150 miles in a day. The mainstream historical fact is the sheer engineering and organizational feat of the Chasqui network, which was more than just mailmen. They were the central nervous system of imperial administration, carrying census data, military orders, and news of rebellions. Modern sports nutritionists who have studied the Chasqui system hypothesize that the specific combination of chuno, complex carbs, and charqui, lean protein, provided an almost ideal macronutrient ratio for sustained high-altitude endurance and recovery. It was ancient fueling science, born of necessity. Some even suggest the alkaloids remaining in trace amounts in some tuna might have had a mild stimulant effect, though that's deep in the realm of fringe theory. This brings us to a debate about the nature of the Inca state's control. Historians still argue whether the Chasqui system was primarily a tool for top-down, centralized control, a way for the Sapa Inca to micromanage his vast domains, or whether it functioned more as a vital circulatory system for economic and social integration, facilitating not just commands, but the movement of goods, ideas, and people. The messages on the quipus likely included more than imperial decrees. They probably carried market information, religious announcements, and news of festivals. The runner, fueled by the stored surplus of the Colcas, wasn't just a courier of power, he was a capillary of culture, his footfalls connecting distant communities to the rhythm of the empire. As you catch your breath, the gritty taste of chuno still in your mouth, you feel a pang of pride. Your fatigue is the physical cost of holding a continent-sized realm together, one sprint at a time. The empire's speed, its very cohesion, is built on the preserved, portable power of the humble, frozen potato. The system was perfect, a closed loop of reciprocity between oath, people, and state. And then, it was shattered. The arrival of the Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century wasn't just a military conquest, it was a cosmological and economic cataclysm. They didn't see Pachamama. They saw real estate. They didn't see colcas full of communal wealth. They saw hoarded treasure or, more often, just primitive granaries. The fracture they created broke the storage system at its spiritual and logistical roots, with devastating consequences that echo for centuries. The first blow was demographic. Old world diseases, smallpox, measles, influenza, ravaged populations that had no immunity. It's estimated that within a century, up to 90% of the Andean population perished. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a systemic collapse. The MITA labor system, the communal work that maintained the terraces, the colcas, and the roads, depended on people. With villages decimated, there were no hands to repair the stone walls after a landslide, no feet to stomp the chuno, no families to tend the diverse potato plots. Vast terraces were abandoned to erosion. Colcas, without maintenance, began to crumble, their intricate ventilation systems clogged with dust and weeds. The physical infrastructure of storage started to rot from disuse. But the Spanish introduced a more insidious virus, a different idea of property. The Inca system was based on vertical archipelagos and communal access. A single community might have plots in different ecological zones to ensure a diverse harvest. The Spanish imposed the European model of private, horizontal land ownership. They carved up the land into haciendas, estates, and reducciones, resettlement towns, breaking the ancient link between a community and its scattered, climate-specific fields. You were forced to live in one place and farm only the land immediately around it, losing access to the high-altitude plots perfect for bitter potatoes or the lower, warmer valleys for other crops. The diversity that was your hedge against disaster was legislated out of existence. Most crucially, they privatized the surplus. The state colcas, the embodiment of the reciprocal safety net, were looted, abandoned, or repurposed. The food was taken to feed Spanish armies, miners, and cities. The concept of a communal reserve, managed for the good of all, was replaced by the accumulation of private wealth. Storage was no longer about resilience for the many, it was about profit for the few. The Spanish crown demanded tribute not in labor for the common good, but in silver from the brutal mines of Potosi. Your world was forcibly reoriented from a cyclical exchange with the earth to a linear extraction for a distant king and god. The mainstream historical fact is the Columbian exchange, the transference of plants, animals, and diseases between the Old and New worlds. The potato itself would eventually sail to Europe and change history there. Some early Spanish chroniclers, upon encountering chuno, were utterly baffled. They described these black, rock-like lumps as some kind of earth or bread made from roots, often expressing disgust. They failed to see its brilliance, its longevity. In their quest for gold, they dismissed a technology more valuable than any precious metal, a technology of time. Some even forced communities to stop producing it in favor of growing wheat, a crop ill-suited to the high Andes, leading to famine. This catastrophic shift forces a somber historical debate. Historians still argue whether the collapse of the Andean storage systems was primarily due to the direct violence of conquest and disease, or whether it was the slower, more profound violence of replacing one economic and spiritual logic with another. Was it the death of the people, or the death of the idea? The evidence is in the landscape itself. The ruins of thousands of kolkas sitting silent, while colonial churches were built from their stones. The knowledge didn't vanish. People still made chuno in their villages. But the vast, interconnected, state-supported system that turned that knowledge into imperial stability was broken. The mountain's breath still froze the potatoes, but no one was building new stone lungs to breathe for an empire. The loop was open, and the warmth was bleeding out. The knowledge didn't die. It couldn't. It was woven into the fabric of daily survival, passed from grandparent to child through the feel of a stomped potato and the sight of a correctly built wall. While the imperial network lay in ruins, the core technology persisted in scattered villages, a quiet, stubborn flame. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, that flame has found new kindling. Today, you can travel to a place like the Parque de la Papa, the Potato Park, near Pisac, Peru. Here, you are not walking among ruins, but through a living library, a defiant, green repository of the future. The Potato Park is a cooperative of Quechua communities that have taken the ancient principle of diversity and scaled it up as an act of biocultural resistance. On these terraced slopes, they cultivate over 1,300 distinct varieties of potato. Walking through the fields with a guardian farmer is a lesson in living history. They point out potatoes with flesh the color of a sunset, potatoes that taste of nuts, potatoes that are naturally resistant to specific blights or droughts. This isn't a museum display. It's a dynamic, evolving gene bank held in trust, not in a sterile seed vault, but in the warm, living soil. They call it in situ conservation, preservation right where the crop evolved. You see the direct lineage from the Inca agricultural laboratories at Murray to this modern, community-led research station. The work here is a conscious revival. Farmers and researchers work together, using both traditional knowledge and modern science. They might use a chaquitakla, the foot plow, to prepare the earth, then employ GPS mapping to document exactly where each heirloom variety thrives. They practice the ancient rituals of offering to Pachamama before planting, understanding that the spiritual relationship is part of the crop's resilience. They are, in essence, becoming modern-day kolka builders, but their storage unit isn't stone for potatoes, it's the landscape itself for genetic code. They are preserving the option, the possibility, the raw biological material that future generations will need as the climate becomes more unpredictable. The mainstream historical fact is that the Andes are one of the world's primary centers of crop biodiversity, and this living library model is now recognized by global organizations like the UN's FAO as a crucial complement to seed banks. Some of the most prized potatoes in the park are not the most productive or the best tasting by conventional standards. They are the guardian varieties, often tough, small, or very bitter, that are kept because they hold genetic traits, like resistance to a rare soil fungus or an ability to thrive in saline earth, that might be useless today but could be the salvation of the global potato crop tomorrow. They are the equivalent of keeping a spare part for a machine that hasn't been invented yet. This modern revival sparks a vital contemporary debate. Historians and agroecologists still argue about the best framework for understanding this work. Is it primarily a post-colonial reclamation of indigenous sovereignty, a taking back of biological and cultural heritage? Or is it better seen as a cutting-edge model of climate adaptation, where traditional knowledge offers practical solutions for a warming world? The folks at the Potato Park would likely say it is both, inseparably. By reviving the diversity, they revive the culture that created it. By listening to the elders who remember which potato grows where, they are writing a survival manual for the 22nd century. As you hold a tiny, blue-fleshed potato in your palm, you're not holding a relic. You're holding a seed of continuity, a tiny, starchy argument that the old ways were not primitive, but profoundly, urgently advanced. Revival isn't just about preserving seeds in a field. Sometimes, it's about rebuilding the very stones that held the system together. Meet someone like Don Antonio, a farm researcher in a remote village in the Cusco region. He grew up hearing stories from his grandparents about the colcas that once dotted the high ridges above his community, how they were always cool inside, how the potatoes stored there never spoiled, how they were the banks of the old people. For years, they were just stories, and the structures themselves were tumble-down piles of rock, their purpose forgotten by all but the oldest shepherds. Then, Don Antonio, driven by curiosity and a growing worry about climate-induced crop losses, decided to do something radical. He decided to read the mountain. He didn't have blueprints. He had the ruins themselves and the stories. He spent months observing the old sites, which way the wind blew, how the sun traveled, where the frost settled first. He listened to the elders describe the shape, the size, the feeling of the interiors. He realized the placement wasn't random, it was a data point. The specific location on a windy saddle, the orientation of the ventilation gaps, the type of stone used, it was all a language. He was deciphering an architectural text written by his ancestors in collaboration with the weather. So, he began to rebuild. Stone by stone, with the help of a few skeptical but willing nephews, he reconstructed a single colca on the footprint of an ancient one. He replicated the double-walled construction, the inner chamber for storage, the precise, baffled venting system at the base and near the roof. He used no mortar, just the ancient art of fitting stone to stone. When it was done, it looked like it had always been there, a stone beehive back from the dead. Then came the test. He filled it with his community's tuno and other dried goods. For a year, they monitored it. The result was a quiet vindication. Inside the colca, the temperature remained a stable, cool 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, 41 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, year-round, while outside it swung from freezing nights to hot days. The potatoes, the beans, the seeds, they stayed perfectly preserved, free from mold or pests. The mountain's breath was flowing through the stone lungs once more. The mainstream historical fact here is the growing field of archaeoengineering or traditional knowledge science, where researchers validate the technical sophistication of ancient structures. Don Antonio's project is a grassroots example of this. Don Antonio reported that after the colca was finished and in use, local animals changed their behavior. Rodents, which plague normal storage sheds, seemed to avoid the area. He speculates, and this is pure, beautiful folklore, that the constant, slight hum of wind through the vents or the specific scent of the cool, dry air inside might have acted as a natural repellent. It's a reminder that these structures didn't just exist in the landscape, they became a new part of its ecosystem. This act of solitary revival opens a debate about the transmission of knowledge. Historians and anthropologists still argue about how such complex engineering principles were originally taught and maintained across the vast Inca Empire without a written manual. Was it through a highly formalized apprenticeship under state architects? Or was the knowledge so deeply embedded in communal practice, through the yearly cycles of building, maintaining, and filling the kolkas, that it became second nature, a shared bodily understanding passed down through doing? Don Antonio's story suggests the latter has a powerful longevity. The knowledge wasn't lost, it was dormant, waiting in the stones and the stories for someone with the need and the patience to listen. His rebuilt kolka isn't a replica, it's a conversation resumed across 5 centuries. As he places a sack of chuno inside its cool, dark interior, he is not just storing food. He is depositing hope, and proving that the most resilient technology is the one that learns from the mountain itself. The line from the Andean altiplano to the vacuum of space is straighter than you might think. The fundamental problem faced by NASA food scientists in the 1960s was eerily similar to that of an Inca logistician. How do you provide lightweight, nutritious, shelf-stable food for a long journey in an utterly hostile environment where resupply is impossible? The answer they innovated was freeze-drying, a high-tech process that is, in essence, the mechanized, industrialized grandchild of making chuno. Here's the connection. Both processes rely on sublimation, the direct transition of a solid, ice, into a gas, water vapor, without passing through a liquid phase. On the altiplano, this is achieved by the natural cycle of freezing nights and sunny, low-humidity days. The potatoes freeze solid. The daytime sun provides just enough energy to sublimate the ice crystals directly out of the tissue, a process aided by the stomping which opens up the cellular structure. In a NASA factory, they replicate this with machinery. Food is flash frozen at extremely low temperatures, then placed in a vacuum chamber. The pressure is dropped so low that the frozen water molecules vibrate themselves directly from ice into vapor, which is then sucked away by the vacuum pump. The result is identical in principle to chuno, a perfectly preserved, lightweight, spongy matrix that will last for decades and reconstitutes with water. Astronauts on Apollo missions, and later on the Space Shuttle and International Space Station, ate meals built around this technology. Their scrambled eggs, their shrimp cocktail, their strawberries, all freeze-dried. When you watch an astronaut squeeze water into a pouch of dried food, they are performing the final step of a food preservation ritual that began with families stomping potatoes under the Southern Cross. The cosmic and the terrestrial are linked by the same physics of preservation. The Inca sent chuno with runners and armies. NASA sent its equivalent with astronauts to the moon. The mainstream historical fact is that NASA's development of freeze-drying for space food revolutionized the commercial food industry, leading to the instant coffee, backpacking meals, and just-add-water emergency rations we know today. In the 2010s, researchers from NASA and partner agencies, looking at future long-duration missions to Mars or beyond, have become deeply interested in bioregenerative life support systems, essentially, growing food in space. Their studies often look at potatoes due to their high caloric yield and nutritional value. And some of the varieties they study? They are looking at those ancient, resilient Andean cultivars from places like the potato park, bred over millennia to tolerate harsh conditions. The technology born from chuno may one day rely on the original chuno potatoes to sustain humans on another planet. This technological echo sparks a philosophical debate. Historians of technology still argue about the nature of innovation. Is it a linear march of progress from primitive to advanced, or is it a series of convergent solutions to similar problems, often rediscovering principles encoded in traditional knowledge? The story of freeze-drying strongly suggests the latter. The Andean method wasn't a crude precursor. It was an elegant, low-energy, zero-waste solution perfectly adapted to its environment. NASA's method is a high-energy, high-control adaptation of the same principle for a different extreme. One is not better than the other. They are brilliant siblings. The altiplano farmer looking at a vacuum freeze dryer might see a noisy, expensive, but fascinatingly familiar machine. As you picture an astronaut floating in zero-G, hydrating a pouch of strawberries, remember the taste of cold morning air and the sound of rhythmic stomping on a mountain plain. The journey to the stars was fueled, in part, by a wisdom stored in the stones of the Andes. Let's return to that field in the potato park, or to your ancestral plot. You're not planting a monoculture. You're planting a riot. In a single, small chakra field, you might sow 20, 50, even 200 different varieties of potato, intermingled. To a modern agronomist trained in the logic of efficiency, this looks like chaos. Rows of one variety? Tractors? Fertilizer? That's not your way. Your way is a living, breathing insurance policy written in leaves and tubers, a strategy so clever it's now called agrobiodiversity. And it wasn't just tradition. It was a brilliant, calculated hedge against the most volatile shareholder of all, the Andean climate. This practice is the embodiment of don't put all your eggs in one basket, but applied on a genetic and ecological scale. The Andes are a theater of microclimates and sudden, brutal weather events. A late frost can wipe out a frost-sensitive variety, but the frost-resistant one next to it will shrug it off. A wet season blight might ravage one genetic line, but the one with natural resistance will thrive. A drought might parch shallow rooting types, while deep-rooting neighbors tap into subsoil moisture. By planting a polyculture, you guarantee that no matter what caprice the mountain gods throw at you this year, something will survive and yield. Your harvest might be different each year, but you will almost always have a harvest. It is resilience through diversity. The system goes deeper. This intercropping, often with other companion plants like beans, which fix nitrogen in the soil, or quinoa, creates a more robust ecosystem. It confuses pests and slows the spread of disease, which have a harder time rampaging through a mixed population than a uniform one. It makes efficient use of soil nutrients at different depths. Furthermore, this practice actively maintains the diversity itself. By saving seeds from the plants that did best this year under these conditions, you are unconsciously conducting a real-time, evolutionary breeding experiment. You are allowing the environment to selectively adapt your seed bank, year after year, generation after generation. The field is not just a production site, it is an open-air genetics laboratory. The mainstream historical fact is that this strategy allowed Andean communities to farm sustainably for millennia without destroying their soils or succumbing to total crop failure, a lesson modern industrial agriculture is painfully relearning. Many traditional farmers believe that the potatoes themselves communicate or support each other. They speak of planting certain varieties together because they are good friends or family, believing they grow better in companionship. Modern science might frame this as beneficial rhizosphere interactions or complementary nutrient uptake, but the traditional knowledge captures the holistic truth of a cooperative system. This leads to a pivotal debate at the intersection of ecology and economics. Development experts and historians still argue whether this highly diversified, low-yield per variety system was a necessity imposed by a difficult environment and primitive technology, or whether it represents a superior, more sustainable model of agriculture that prioritizes long-term stability and risk management over short-term maximized production. The green revolution of the 20th century, with its push for monocultures of high-yield varieties, clearly believed the former. But as climate change increases volatility and soil degradation, the latter view is gaining powerful traction. The Andean farmer, saving seeds from 200 different potatoes, wasn't being backward. They were playing a deeper, longer game against uncertainty. Their storage system didn't start in the colca. It started with this vibrant, chaotic, brilliant gamble in the soil. In the face of a changing climate, the old knowledge is no longer just a cultural artifact, it's a strategic resource. But who owns it? Who benefits? This is where a new, collaborative model is being forged, one that tries to mend the fracture of the colonial era. It's a partnership between the guardians of the potato park and international research institutions like the International Potato Center, CIP, in Lima. This isn't about scientists discovering and patenting indigenous knowledge. It's about a dialogue, a sharing of protocols, where both sides bring their unique genius to the table. The process is known as participatory plant breeding or, more poetically, creating climate-smart potatoes. Here's how it works. The Quechua communities provide the raw material, the hundreds of locally adapted heirloom varieties from their fields, each carrying traits honed by thousands of years of selection. They also provide the deep, observational knowledge. This one always does well when the rains come late. That one's leaves never get the black spots. The scientists from CIP bring their tools, genomic sequencing to identify the specific genes responsible for drought tolerance or blight resistance, controlled greenhouse trials, and breeding techniques to carefully cross varieties. But the critical work happens back in the communities. The crossbred seeds are given to the farmers to plant in their own fields, under real-world conditions. The farmers evaluate them not just for yield, but for taste, for how well they make chuno, for how they fit into their rituals. The farmers, not the scientists, are the final judges. This model flips the script on traditional bioprospecting. Instead of extracting genetic material, patenting it, and selling it back, the goal is to co-create openly available, resilient varieties. The communities are recognized as innovators and partners, not just sources. Any new varieties that emerge are owned collectively by the communities, and the seeds remain in their custody, flowing back into their living libraries. The knowledge exchange goes both ways. Scientists learn about holistic agroecological relationships, while farmers gain insights into the molecular mechanisms behind the traits they've observed for generations. The mainstream historical fact is that this collaborative model has already produced tangible results, like potato varieties with enhanced resistance to late blight, the disease that caused the Irish potato famine, bred from Andean sources and now helping farmers in Africa and Asia. These partnerships often involve creating formal agreements of reciprocal respect or biocultural protocols. These are legalish documents, but instead of citing patents, they might cite the rights of Pachamama and the principle of Aini, reciprocity. They represent a fascinating fusion of legal frameworks and cosmological principles, an attempt to build a bridge between two worldviews on a foundation of mutual need. This cooperative endeavor is not without its tensions, which feed an ongoing global debate. Ethicists and agronomists still argue about the best frameworks for ensuring equity in such partnerships. Is it enough to guarantee that new varieties are open source and community owned, or should there be monetary benefit sharing if those varieties become commercially successful elsewhere? How do you truly value knowledge that is both practical and sacred? The partnership between the Potato Park and CIP is a pioneering attempt to navigate these questions. It suggests that the future of food security may not lie in a single, patented super potato, but in decentralized, adaptable portfolios of seeds, managed by the communities who know them best, supported by science, and protected by new forms of respect. As a farmer in the park examines a new, experimental tuber, they are not just a test subject. They are a co-author, writing the next chapter of a 10,000-year story of adaptation, using both the language of their ancestors and the lexicon of modern genetics. The sun is setting on the Altiplano, painting the sky in streaks of violet and gold. You stand before the colca once more, the one Don Antonio rebuilt or perhaps an ancient, crumbling original. The wind has dropped to a whisper, a gentle sigh through the Ichu grass. The day's heat is bleeding away, and the first sharp promise of the night's cold touches your cheeks. All the stories, the stomping, the running, the planting, the praying, they all lead back to this silent, stone form. It is not a monument to conquest, like a pyramid or a triumphal arch. It is a monument to patience. A monument to listening. You run your hand over the stones, cool and rough against your skin. You feel no hubris here, no declaration of human dominance over nature. Instead, you feel the profound intelligence of collaboration. The kolka does not fight the cold, it invites it in, channels it, uses it. It doesn't defy the wind, it breathes with it. This is the core lesson, the whisper that has traveled through centuries, from the builders of the first stone ring to the geneticists in the potato park. True resilience isn't about creating an impervious fortress against change. It's about developing the flexibility to adapt, to incorporate, to flow. It's about having so many options, so many varieties in the field, so many preservation methods, so many stored reserves, that no single shock can break the system. The strength was in the network, the diversity, the distributed intelligence. Think of the empire at its height not as a rigid hierarchy, but as a mycorrhizal network, a vast, underground fungal web connecting trees in a forest, sharing nutrients and warnings. The kolka was a node in that web. The runner was a signal. The diverse field was a gene pool. The ritual was the code that maintained it all. The colonial fracture tried to cut those connections, to privatize the nodes, to simplify the code. But the knowledge, like a dormant potato, waited in the cold earth. Now, as the stars begin to pierce the darkening cobalt of the sky, you understand the full circle. The work of the guardians in the potato park, the stubborn rebuilders like Don Antonio, the scientists forging new protocols of respect, they are not looking backward with nostalgia. They are listening forward. They are hearing the same fundamental rhythms their ancestors heard. The rhythm of freeze and thaw, of drought and rain, of scarcity and abundance. They are translating those rhythms for a new, unstable century, using both the old stones and the new tools. The goal is the same, to keep the future nourished, to keep the options open, to store time in a form that can be redeemed when needed. The wind through the kolka's vents makes a soft, low hum, like the mountain itself is breathing slowly in its sleep. It is a sound of profound peace, of a system in balance. There is no final victory here, no end to the struggle. There is only the continuous, careful, reciprocal act of preservation, of holding back a piece of today's sun to warm a tomorrow you cannot yet see. You take one last look at the dark silhouette against the starry sky, a shape both ancient and urgently modern, and you know. The greatest treasure they ever stored was not the potato itself, but the wisdom of how to keep it. So let that image settle in your mind's eye now, as the coolness of the high plain seems to seep into your own room. The silent, sturdy shape of the kolka against an infinite star field, holding its quiet vigil. Feel the simplicity of its purpose, not to shout, but to sustain. Not to dominate the horizon, but to harmonize with it. The day's frenetic energy, the stomping and running and debating, all fades into the deep, still certainty of the night. You've journeyed across millennia and up the very ribs of the continents, and you've found, at the end, a profound and gentle calm. The brilliance of those ancient farmers wasn't in moving mountains, but in learning their language. In hearing the wisdom in the crack of frost and the direction of the wind. They built a conversation with the earth into their very food, their very storage, their very society. And in that, they left a whisper for us, a reminder that our own frenzied searches for security might be missing the point. That sometimes, Resilience looks less like a fortified wall and more like a well-tended, wildly diverse garden, and a cool, dark place to keep its gifts safe. Let your own breath slow now, to match that long, slow breath of the mountain. Let the complexities of terraces and genomes, of empires and partnerships, soften into a single, comforting truth. That there is deep intelligence in patience, in diversity, in listening. The problems they solved were immense, but the solutions were rooted in observation, reciprocity, and care. Carry that quiet assurance with you into sleep. No more stomping, no more running. Just the peaceful, enduring hum of a well-kept storehouse, holding tomorrow safely in the dark, promising that when the new day comes, there will be nourishment, there will be warmth, there will be another chance to grow.